Please, don't call the police." "I'm not stealing," the little girl whispered, her voice trembling beneath the sterile glow of fluorescent lights as a small amber bottle slipped from her hands and rolled across the polished marble floor of Whitmore Pharmacy. The sound echoed through the pristine aisles like a fragile heartbeat, drawing the attention of every customer inside. Amara Johnson stood frozen near the counter, her thin fingers clutching a crumpled prescription, her worn sneakers barely touching the gleaming tiles that reflected her anxious silhouette. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, her deep brown skin luminous beneath the harsh white lights, her hair neatly braided despite the fraying edges of her faded blue sweater. Tears shimmered in her wide eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "My mom, she can't breathe," she murmured, her voice barely louder than a breath. "She needs this medicine tonight." A murmur rippled through the store. A woman in a tailored coat tightened her grip on her designer handbag, while a man near the register frowned in quiet disapproval. The pharmacist, standing stiffly behind the counter, adjusted his glasses and glanced at the security monitor. "Young lady," he said cautiously, "you can't take anything without paying." Amara swallowed hard and slowly opened her palm, revealing 3 worn dollar bills and a handful of coins that clinked softly together. "This is all I have," she said, her voice quivering with honesty. "I was going to pay the rest later. I promise." The pharmacist hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his face, but the store manager's expression hardened. "Rules are rules," he said firmly, reaching toward the phone. "We can't make exceptions." The word struck the air like a gavel. Amara's shoulders trembled, yet she stood her ground, her small chin lifting with quiet dignity. Just as the tension threatened to shatter the moment, the glass doors slid open with a gentle chime, allowing a stream of golden evening light to spill across the marble floor. Conversations hushed as a tall figure stepped inside, his presence commanding without a single word. Alexander Whitmore, billionaire. Entrepreneur, philanthropist, and owner of the Whitmore Health Foundation, paused at the entrance, his tailored charcoal suit and polished leather shoes reflecting understated power. He had intended only to pick up a prescription on his way home from a long day of negotiations in Midtown Manhattan. But something stopped him. It wasn't the murmurs or the tension. It was the sound of a child's voice trembling with courage. His gaze drifted toward the counter, where he saw her, small, frightened, yet standing with a quiet strength that silenced the room. "Wait," he said calmly, his deep voice cutting through the air. The manager froze mid-motion. Alexander stepped forward, the soft click of his shoes echoing across the store. He knelt beside Amara, bringing himself to her level, his expression gentle but intent. "Tell me what happened," he said softly. Amara hesitated, her fingers tightening around the crumpled prescription before she placed it in his hand. "My mom is sick," she whispered. "She's been coughing all day. She tried to hide it, but I heard her struggling to breathe. The doctor said she needs this medicine, but we don't have enough money." I didn't know what else to do. The store fell silent. Even the hum of the fluorescent light seemed to fade as Alexander studied the paper in his hand. The ink was smudged, but the diagnosis was clear. He looked back at her, and in her eyes he saw not desperation, but devotion. Memories stirred, late nights beside his own mother's hospital bed, the quiet fear of losing the only person who believed in him. His throat tightened. Slowly, he rose to his feet and turned toward the counter. "Ring it up," he said quietly. The manager blinked. "So?" Alexander's voice remained steady. "All of it. And anything else she needs." Gasps filled the room as Amara stared up at him, disbelief shining in her tearful eyes. But Alexander wasn't finished. He removed his wool coat and gently draped it over her shoulders. "Take me to your mother," he said softly. Outside, dusk settled over Manhattan, the city lights flickering to life like distant stars. As the pharmacy doors opened and the cool evening air swept inside, neither of them knew that this quiet act of compassion was about to change their lives forever. The hallway smelled faintly of detergent and old wood as Amara Johnson pushed open the narrow door, its hinges creaking softly beneath her trembling hand. A single flickering bulb cast a warm but fragile glow along the worn staircase, illuminating scuffed steps and peeling paint that whispered stories of years gone by. Alexander Whitmore followed quietly behind her, his polished shoes a stark contrast against the cracked linoleum floor, yet his presence carried no judgment, only calm assurance. Amara glanced back at him, her small fingers clutching the paper bag of medicine as though it were the only thing holding her world together. "We live on the 3rd floor," she said softly, her voice barely louder than a breath. Alexander nodded, allowing her to lead. Each step echoed gently in the quiet building, the distant hum of traffic outside blending with the rhythmic pounding of Amara's hopeful heart. When they reached the final landing, she paused at a faded blue door, its paint chipped at the edges. She hesitated for a moment, gathering her courage, then knocked gently. "Mom," she called, her voice tender and careful. "It is me. I am home." There was a faint rustle from within, followed by a soft, weary reply. "Amara?" The door opened slowly, revealing Lillian Johnson, her figure slender and fragile beneath the dim light. Her warm brown eyes, though tired, shimmered with relief at the sight of her daughter. "You should not have gone out alone," she whispered, her voice strained but loving. Amara rushed forward, wrapping her arms around her mother with gentle urgency. "I brought the medicine," she said, holding up the small bag. "Everything is going to be all right." Lillian's gaze shifted to Alexander, uncertainty flickering across her delicate features. "I am sorry," she said politely, straightening despite her exhaustion. "May I ask who you are?" Alexander inclined his head respectfully. "My name is Alexander Whitmore. Your daughter showed remarkable courage tonight. I simply offered assistance." Lillian's eyes widened with quiet astonishment, but gratitude soon softened her expression. "Thank you, sir," she replied, her voice filled with sincerity. "She is my whole world." The modest apartment behind her was tidy but humble, furnished with a small sofa, a worn wooden table, and neatly folded laundry stacked in careful piles. A kettle rested on the stove, and the faint scent of chamomile tea lingered in the air, revealing a life built on resilience and dignity. Amara gently guided her mother to the sofa. "Please sit," she urged, carefully handing her the medicine. As Lillian accepted it, Alexander stepped forward with reassuring calm. "I have already contacted a physician from my foundation," he said. "He will arrive shortly to ensure you receive proper care." Lillian's eyes filled with quiet disbelief. "You have done more than we could ever repay," she said softly. Alexander offered a gentle smile. "Kindness does not require repayment. It only asks to be passed forward." Amara looked up at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. Outside, the distant wail of an approaching siren drifted through the night, growing steadily closer. The soft blue glow of emergency lights soon reflected against the apartment window, casting gentle patterns across the room. Amara's heart swelled with hope as she reached for her mother's hand. Alexander stood beside them, his gaze thoughtful and resolute, sensing that this moment marked more than an act of charity. It was the beginning of a promise, one born not from wealth, but from compassion. As the sound of footsteps approached the door and the city lights shimmered beyond the glass, Alexander realized that fate had led him here for a reason, and the story unfolding within these humble walls was only just beginning. The distant siren grew louder, its gentle wail echoing through the quiet apartment as soft blue lights flickered across the window, casting shimmering reflections against the pale walls. Amara Johnson sat beside her mother on the worn sofa, her small hand wrapped protectively around Lillian's trembling fingers, while Alexander Whitmore stood nearby, his presence calm and reassuring like an anchor in a restless sea. A firm but courteous knock sounded at the door. Alexander stepped forward and opened it, revealing a neatly dressed physician carrying a black leather medical bag. "Good evening," the doctor said warmly. "I am Dr. Benjamin Carter from the Whitmore Health Foundation." Lillian straightened slightly, her eyes widening with gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. Dr. Carter nodded with a reassuring smile. "Let us take a look and make sure you are comfortable." He moved with quiet efficiency, checking her pulse, listening to her breathing, and reviewing the prescription Amara had risked everything to obtain. The room fell silent except for the gentle rustle of his instruments and the steady ticking of a small clock on the wall. After a moment, the doctor's expression softened. "You sought help just in time," he said gently. With proper treatment and rest, you will recover. Relief washed over Amara's face like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She is going to be okay, she asked, her voice trembling with hope. Dr. Carter smiled warmly. Yes, young lady. She is. Lillian's eyes filled with tears as she reached for her daughter's hand. You were so brave, she whispered. Amara shook her head, her voice small but resolute. I was just doing what you taught me, Mom. Alexander watched the exchange in silence, deeply moved. The modest apartment, though humble, radiated dignity and warmth. A stack of neatly folded laundry rested on a chair, and a small vase of daisies sat by the window, their fragile petals catching the glow of the city lights. It was a life built not on wealth, but on perseverance and love. Dr. Carter carefully handed Lillian the medicine. Take 1 dose every 6 hours and drink plenty of fluids, he instructed kindly. I will arrange a follow-up visit tomorrow. Alexander nodded in agreement. Please ensure she receives anything she needs, he added quietly. Consider it done, the doctor replied with a respectful nod. As he packed his bag, Amara looked up at Alexander, her eyes shimmering with gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. You saved my mom. Alexander knelt beside her, his voice gentle and sincere. No, Amara. You did. Your courage brought help to your door. Lillian smiled faintly, her gaze filled with emotion. There are not enough words to express our gratitude, Mr. Whitmore. He offered a humble smile. Kindness is never a transaction. It is a responsibility we share. Outside, the city pulsed with life, its distant lights glittering like constellations against the night sky. Inside, the tension that had once filled the room melted into quiet relief. As Dr. Carter prepared to leave, he turned to Alexander. She will recover well, he said. But rest and stability will be essential. Alexander nodded thoughtfully, his gaze drifting toward the modest surroundings. A quiet realization settled within him, deeper than obligation, stronger than impulse. He looked at Amara and Lillian, understanding that this moment was only the beginning of something far greater. As the doctor stepped into the hallway and the door closed gently behind him, a peaceful silence enveloped the room. Amara leaned against her mother's shoulder, her heart finally at ease. Alexander stood by the window, watching the city lights shimmer across the glass. For the first time in years, he felt the unmistakable pull of purpose. And as hope filled the small apartment, he knew that the night's act of compassion was about to reshape not only their future, but his own. The soft glow of the bedside lamp bathed the modest apartment in warmth as a peaceful silence settled over the room, broken only by the distant murmur of city traffic drifting through the window. Amara Johnson remained seated beside her mother, her small fingers still wrapped gently around Lillian's hand as though afraid to let go of the miracle that had just unfolded. Lillian leaned back against the worn cushions, her breathing now steady and calm, her tired eyes filled with relief and quiet gratitude. Across the room, Alexander Whitmore stood near the window, gazing out at the glittering skyline of Manhattan, its towering lights shimmering like constellations against the velvet night. He had attended countless galas in penthouses overlooking the Hudson River, signed deals worth millions of dollars, and walked through halls of power without hesitation, yet none of those moments stirred him as deeply as the quiet courage he had witnessed within these humble walls. Turning slowly, he studied the apartment with thoughtful attention. Though modest, it was meticulously clean. Neatly folded laundry rested in careful stacks, and a small bookshelf held worn novels and school textbooks arranged with pride. On the wall hung a collection of Amara's drawings, colorful sketches of flowers, sunshine, and smiling faces that radiated hope. One drawing, framed with care, depicted a mother and daughter holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. Alexander felt something shift within his chest as he realized that love, not wealth, was the foundation of this home. You have raised an extraordinary young lady, he said gently. Lillian smiled faintly, her voice soft but steady. Amara has always had a brave heart. She reminds me every day that kindness costs nothing, yet it means everything. Amara lowered her gaze shyly, her cheeks warming at the praise. I was just trying to help, she murmured. Alexander knelt beside her, his expression sincere. "And you did more than help. You showed the world what true courage looks like." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a sleek business card embossed with silver lettering. Handing it to Lillian, he spoke with quiet conviction. "Please accept this. It has my direct number. If you need anything, medical care, financial assistance, or support, do not hesitate to call. You and your daughter should never have to face hardship alone." Lillian accepted the card with trembling hands, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Your kindness has given us hope," she said softly. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore." He offered a gentle smile. "Please call me Alexander." Outside, a soft breeze stirred the curtains, carrying with it the distant hum of the city that never slept. Amara looked up at him with shining eyes. "Will we ever see you again?" she asked timidly. Alexander paused, meeting her hopeful gaze. "Yes," he replied warmly. "This is not the end of our story. It is only the beginning." Rising to his feet, he placed his coat gently around Amara's shoulders once more before heading toward the door. As he stepped into the dimly lit hallway, he cast one final glance back at the apartment. Mother and daughter sat together, their hands intertwined, illuminated by a quiet glow of renewed hope. In that moment, Alexander realized that the greatest investment he would ever make was not measured in dollars, but in lives changed. As he descended the staircase and returned to the waiting city below, he carried with him a newfound sense of purpose, certain that destiny had brought him to their door for a reason, and that the promise born that night was destined to reshape their futures in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The night air was cool and fragrant with the distant scent of rain as Alexander Whitmore stepped out of the aging brownstone and onto the quiet Manhattan sidewalk, the city lights reflecting softly against the polished surface of his waiting Rolls-Royce. For a moment, he stood still beneath the glow of a flickering street lamp, his gaze drifting upward toward the third-floor window where a faint golden light still burned. Behind that window, a mother rested safely and a little girl finally slept without fear, and for the first time in years, Alexander felt something deeper than satisfaction settle within his heart. It was not pride. It was purpose. The driver opened the car door respectfully, but Alexander paused before entering, his thoughts echoing with Amara's soft voice and unwavering courage. He remembered the way she had stood in that pharmacy, her small hands trembling yet her spirit unshaken, driven not by desperation alone but by love. As he settled into the leather seat, the door closing with a quiet click, the city began to move once more around him. "Home, sir?" the driver asked gently. Alexander glanced once more at the building before responding. "Not yet," he said thoughtfully. "Take me to the Whitmore Foundation." The Rolls-Royce glided through the glowing streets of Manhattan, passing beneath towering skyscrapers and neon reflections that shimmered across rain-kissed pavement. Inside the car, the silence was serene, broken only by the soft hum of the engine. Alexander loosened his tie slightly, his mind replaying the evening's events with remarkable clarity. He had spent decades building an empire, rooted in innovation and philanthropy, yet tonight had reminded him of the true reason he began. His mother's voice seemed to whisper through memory, warm and steady. "Kindness is the only legacy that endures." He had promised her long ago that he would use his success to help those who had no one else to turn to. Somewhere along the way, ambition had overshadowed that promise. Tonight, a little girl had brought it back to life. Minutes later, the car pulled up to a sleek glass tower bearing the illuminated emblem of the Whitmore Health Foundation. The lobby lights glowed softly against the midnight sky as Alexander stepped inside. The night receptionist straightened in surprise. "Good evening, Mr. Whitmore," she said politely. "Good evening," he replied with a gentle nod. "Please contact the board of directors first thing in the morning. I want an emergency meeting scheduled." She blinked in curiosity. "Of course, sir." Alexander continued toward his private office, where the city skyline stretched beyond floor-to-ceiling windows like a sea of stars. Removing his coat, he placed it carefully over the back of his chair and gazed out at the horizon. The memory of Amara's hopeful eyes lingered in his mind. Taking a seat, he opened a leather-bound notebook and began to write with quiet determination. Establish a new initiative. Expand access to affordable medicine. Provide healthcare for families in need. As the pen moved across the page, his vision sharpened into purpose. This would not be a temporary act of generosity. It would be a lasting change. By dawn, he knew, a new chapter would begin. Meanwhile, in the small apartment miles away, Amara stirred gently in her sleep, curled beside her mother, the billionaire's coat draped over her like a promise of protection. A soft smile touched her lips as she dreamed, unaware that her courage had already set something extraordinary in motion. Back in his office, Alexander closed the notebook and whispered to the silent city, "This is only the beginning." And beyond the glass, as the first hints of dawn painted the horizon in shades of gold and rose, destiny quietly unfolded, preparing to transform 3 lives forever. Morning light spilled gently across the Manhattan skyline, bathing the city in hues of gold and amber as the first rays of dawn reflected against towering glass buildings. Inside the Whitmore Health Foundation headquarters, Alexander Whitmore stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, his silhouette framed by the awakening city. He had not slept, yet his eyes carried a renewed clarity, sharpened by purpose. The memory of Amara Johnson's quiet bravery lingered in his thoughts, echoing with the steady rhythm of a promise he intended to keep. Behind him, the conference room doors opened, and members of the Foundation's board entered one by one, their expressions curious yet respectful. They had received his urgent message at sunrise, and now they gathered around the polished mahogany table, awaiting his words. Alexander turned to face them, his presence calm yet commanding. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," he began, his voice steady and resolute. "Last night, I witnessed something that reminded me why this foundation exists. I met a young girl whose courage saved her mother's life. She had nothing but a prescription, a few dollars, and an unshakable determination to do what was right." The room fell silent as his words settled over them. He continued, his tone filled with conviction. "Too many families in this city are forced to choose between survival and dignity. That ends now. Today, we launch a new initiative to provide free and accessible medication for those in need. No child should ever have to stand alone in a pharmacy, hoping that compassion will outweigh circumstance." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room as the board members exchanged thoughtful glances. One of them leaned forward. "What will we call the program, Mr. Whitmore?" Alexander paused, recalling the gentle strength in Amara's voice. A faint smile touched his lips. "We will call it the Amara Care Initiative," he said quietly. "It will ensure that hope is never out of reach." The decision was met with unanimous approval, and within hours, preparations began. Meanwhile, across the city, sunlight filtered through thin curtains into the modest apartment on the 3rd floor of the brownstone. Amara stirred softly as the morning glow warmed her face. The wool coat still draped over her shoulders, carrying the faint scent of cedar and reassurance. She opened her eyes to the comforting sound of her mother's steady breathing. Lillian Johnson sat upright at the small kitchen table, sipping tea and smiling gently. Color had returned to her cheeks, and strength shimmered in her gaze. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said warmly. Amara rushed into her arms, her laughter filling the room like music. "You are better," she exclaimed. Lillian nodded, brushing a braid from her daughter's face. "Thanks to you, and to a kind man who reminded us that goodness still exists." At that moment, a soft knock echoed through the apartment. Amara opened the door to find a courier standing in the hallway, holding an elegant envelope embossed with silver lettering. Inside was a letter bearing Alexander Whitmore's signature. It informed them that Lillian's medical care would be fully covered by the Whitmore Health Foundation and that Amara had been awarded a scholarship to attend one of the city's finest preparatory schools. Tears of gratitude shimmered in Lillian's eyes as Amara read the words aloud, her voice trembling with wonder. Far above the bustling streets, Alexander stood once more at his office window, watching the city come alive beneath the rising sun. He knew that the ripple of one small act of courage had begun to transform countless lives. And as the morning light illuminated the skyline, he understood that destiny had woven their paths together for a reason, setting into motion a future brighter than any of them could have imagined. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of an elegant preparatory academy on Manhattan's Upper East Side, casting warm golden patterns across polished marble floors and ivy-covered brick walls. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of freshly cut grass as luxury sedans lined the circular driveway, their doors opening to welcome students dressed in tailored uniforms and polished shoes. Among them stood Amara Johnson, her small hands clasped tightly around the strap of her new navy blue backpack. Her neatly pressed uniform felt unfamiliar against her skin, and her eyes widened as she gazed up at the grand columns that framed the entrance. Just days ago, she had watched the city from a modest apartment window. Now she stood before a future she had never dared to imagine. Beside her, Lillian Johnson smiled with quiet pride, her strength returning with each passing hour. She reached down to straighten Amara's collar, her voice warm and reassuring. "Remember, sweetheart, you belong here just as much as anyone else." Amara nodded, though a flicker of uncertainty shimmered in her eyes. "Do you think they will like me?" she asked softly. Lillian brushed a braid gently from her daughter's face. "They will respect you because you are kind, brave, and true to yourself." Just then, a sleek black Rolls-Royce pulled gracefully to the curb. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door, revealing Alexander Whitmore. Dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, he stepped into the morning light with quiet authority. His gaze softened when he saw Amara, her determination shining even brighter than her nerves. "Good morning, Amara," he said warmly. Her face lit up. "Good morning, Alexander." Lillian inclined her head respectfully. "We cannot thank you enough." Alexander offered a gentle smile. "Your gratitude is not necessary. It is an honor to support such courage." He turned to Amara and knelt slightly to meet her at eye level. "This school is filled with opportunity," he said kindly. "But remember, what makes you extraordinary is not where you study, but who you are." Amara took a deep breath, drawing strength from his words. "I will make you proud," she said with quiet determination. Alexander shook his head gently. "Make yourself proud. That is what truly matters." As they approached the grand entrance, whispers rippled among nearby parents and students who recognized the renowned billionaire. Some watched with curiosity, others with admiration, yet Amara walked forward with steady grace, her small steps echoing across the marble floor. Inside, sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, illuminating a hallway lined with portraits of scholars and innovators. The school's headmistress greeted them with a gracious smile. "Welcome, Miss Johnson. We have been expecting you." She extended her hand warmly. "You are an inspiration already." Amara's eyes sparkled with wonder as she accepted the greeting. "Thank you, After completing the formalities, Lillian embraced her daughter gently. "I will be waiting for you this afternoon," she whispered. Amara nodded, her heart swelling with hope. As she turned toward her classroom, Alexander watched quietly, pride reflecting in his eyes. The little girl who once stood trembling in a pharmacy now walked with confidence toward a brighter future. As the bell chimed softly through the hallways, Amara glanced back one last time, offering a grateful smile. In that fleeting moment, Alexander realized that her courage had not only transformed her own destiny but had rekindled something within him as well. And as the doors closed gently behind her, he sensed that this was only the beginning of a journey destined to change far more lives than they could ever imagine. The soft chime of the morning bell echoed through the marble corridors of the academy, signaling the beginning of a new chapter as Amara Johnson stepped into her classroom with quiet determination. Sunlight filtered through tall arched windows, casting golden patterns across polished wooden desks and illuminating rows of students dressed in immaculate uniforms. Conversations hushed as curious eyes turned toward her. Some were welcoming, others uncertain, but Amara held her head high, remembering her mother's words and Alexander Whitmore's encouragement. She took a deep breath and approached an empty seat near the window, her fingers gently tracing the smooth surface of the desk as she settled in. Outside, autumn leaves drifted through the courtyard like fragments of amber and gold, reminding her that change, though unfamiliar, could be beautiful. The teacher, Mrs. Davenport, greeted her with a warm smile. "Class, this is Amara Johnson," she announced kindly. She joins us today on a full academic scholarship. Please make her feel welcome." A ripple of polite applause filled the room, easing the tension in Amara's chest. As the lesson began, she listened attentively, her eyes bright with curiosity. When asked to solve a problem on the board, she hesitated for only a moment before rising gracefully. With steady confidence, she wrote the correct answer, her neat handwriting reflecting both discipline and determination. A murmur of admiration spread among her classmates, and Mrs. Davenport nodded approvingly. "Excellent work, Amara." Encouraged by the acknowledgement, Amara returned to her seat with a shy smile, her confidence growing stronger with each passing minute. Meanwhile, high above the city, Alexander Whitmore sat in his office overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Reports of the Amara Care initiative lay neatly arranged on his desk, detailing the rapid expansion of free medication programs across underserved communities. His assistant entered quietly. "Mr. Whitmore, the initiative is receiving national attention," she said. "Hospitals and pharmacies across the country are requesting partnerships." Alexander nodded thoughtfully, gazing out at the city below. "Then let us ensure that every family who needs help receives it," he replied. "No one should have to choose between health and hope." Back at the academy, the lunch bell rang, and students gathered in the grand dining hall adorned with crystal chandeliers and tall windows overlooking manicured gardens. Amara sat alone at first, her tray carefully balanced before her. For a moment, uncertainty flickered in her eyes. Then a gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. "May I sit here?" asked a girl with kind eyes and a welcoming smile. "My name is Emily." Amara brightened. "I am Amara. It is nice to meet you." Soon, conversation flowed easily, laughter replacing hesitation as new friendships began to form. Across the city, Lillian Johnson finished her follow-up appointment at a Whitmore Health Foundation clinic. The doctor smiled reassuringly. "You are recovering beautifully. Continue your treatment, and you will regain your full strength." Gratitude warmed her heart as she stepped into the afternoon sunlight, knowing that her daughter's courage had opened a door to a brighter future. As the school day ended, Amara paused in the courtyard. Beneath a towering oak tree, its golden leaves shimmering in the breeze. She looked up at the sky, her heart filled with hope and determination. She silently promised herself that she would honor the kindness she had received by becoming someone who could help others in return. In that moment, far above the bustling streets, Alexander Whitmore gazed at the same sky through the glass walls of his office. He sensed that the ripple of one brave act continued to expand, touching lives in ways he had only begun to imagine. And as the sun dipped gently toward the horizon, painting the city in shades of amber and rose, destiny moved forward with quiet certainty, guiding them toward a future bound not by circumstance, but by compassion, resilience, and the enduring power of hope. Golden sunlight stretched across the Manhattan skyline as afternoon drifted into evening, painting the city in hues of amber and rose. In the quiet courtyard of the academy, Amara Johnson stood beneath the broad branches of an ancient oak tree, its leaves whispering gently in the autumn breeze. The day had unfolded like a dream, filled with new lessons, new friendships, and a newfound sense of belonging. Yet beneath her calm smile lingered a quiet determination. She knew she carried more than opportunity, she carried a promise. As she adjusted the strap of her navy blue backpack, her friend Emily approached with a cheerful grin. "You did amazing today," Emily said warmly. "Mrs. Davenport could not stop praising you." Amara smiled shyly. "Thank you. I was nervous at first, but everyone has been kind." Emily nodded. "You are going to do great things here. I can tell." Their laughter echoed softly across the courtyard as the final bell of the day chimed through the halls. Moments later, a familiar black Rolls-Royce glided to the curb outside the academy gates. Alexander Whitmore stepped out, his presence composed and dignified beneath the glow of the setting sun. When Amara saw him, her face lit with gratitude. She hurried toward him, her steps light with excitement. "Alexander," she called, her voice bright. He smiled warmly. "Good afternoon, Amara. How was your first day?" Her eyes sparkled. "It was wonderful. I answered questions in class, made a new friend, and learned more than I ever imagined. Thank you for believing in me. Alexander inclined his head gently. You earned this opportunity through your courage and your heart. Never forget that. Nearby, Lillian Johnson approached, her posture stronger and her expression radiant with pride. She has not stopped smiling since this morning, she said softly. Neither have I. Alexander's gaze softened. Seeing her thrive is the greatest reward. As they spoke, a few parents and students paused nearby, whispering in admiration. News of the Amara Care initiative had spread rapidly across the city, inspiring hope and drawing national attention. Cameras from a local news station stood discreetly near the entrance, capturing a story that had already begun to change lives. A reporter approached respectfully. Mr. Whitmore, may we ask what inspired your latest initiative? Alexander glanced at Amara, then back at the reporter. It was inspired by courage, he replied calmly. Sometimes, the smallest voices carry the greatest truths. One brave child reminded me that compassion must never wait. Amara lowered her eyes modestly, her cheeks warming as Lillian gently squeezed her hand. As the interview concluded, the evening sky deepened into shades of violet and gold. Alexander turned toward Amara once more. Would you like to visit the Whitmore Health Foundation tomorrow? He asked. I would like you to see the impact you have made. Her eyes widened with wonder. Really? I would love that. He nodded. Then it is settled. The city lights began to shimmer to life, reflecting across the polished streets as the Rolls-Royce door opened once more. As Amara and her mother prepared to depart, she looked back at the Grand Academy and then up at Alexander. I promise I will work hard, she said softly. One day, I want to help people the way you have helped us. Alexander's expression softened with pride. And when that day comes, he replied, the world will be brighter because of you. As the car pulled away, the Academy's silhouette faded into the glowing horizon. High above the city, the first stars appeared, silent. Witnesses to a destiny unfolding. In that quiet moment, 3 lives moved forward on a shared path of purpose, guided by courage, compassion, and the enduring power of hope, unaware that an even greater revelation awaited just beyond the dawn. The following morning dawned crisp and radiant over Manhattan, the early sunlight glimmering across glass towers like liquid gold as the city stirred awake. Inside the Whitmore Health Foundation headquarters, anticipation filled the grand atrium, where polished marble floors reflected soft beams of light cascading through towering windows. Amara Johnson stepped inside beside her mother, her eyes widening with awe as she took in the elegant surroundings. The building seemed to hum with purpose, its atmosphere alive with quiet determination and hope. Lillian Johnson paused beside her, gently squeezing her daughter's hand. This place exists because of people like you, she whispered warmly. Amara shook her head modestly. Because of people like Alexander, she replied softly. At that moment, the elevator doors opened, and Alexander Whitmore emerged with a welcoming smile. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, he approached them with calm confidence. Good morning, he said. I am glad you could join me. Amara's face brightened. Thank you for inviting us. He inclined his head graciously. Today, you will see the difference your courage has already made. He guided them through the expansive halls, where doctors, nurses, and volunteers moved with purpose. Screens displayed maps dotted with newly established clinics, while banners proudly announced the Amara Care initiative. Families from diverse backgrounds sat in waiting areas, their faces reflecting relief and gratitude. As they walked, a young boy approached with his mother, both smiling warmly. Mr. Whitmore, the woman said, her voice filled with emotion. Because of your program, my son received the medication he needed. Thank you. Alexander gestured gently toward Amara. You should thank her. She is the reason this initiative exists. The woman knelt beside Amara, her eyes shimmering with gratitude. Your bravery gave hope to families like mine, she said softly. Amara's cheeks flushed with humility as she offered a shy smile. I only wanted to help my mom. Alexander watched the exchange quietly, pride shining in his eyes. He then led them into a spacious conference room where a small ceremony had been arranged. Members of the foundation, medical professionals, and community leaders gathered, their applause filling the room as Amara and Lillian entered. A large screen illuminated behind them, displaying the words Amara Care Initiative, Compassion in Action. Alexander stepped to the podium, his voice steady yet deeply heartfelt. Sometimes, the world changes not because of power or wealth, but because of courage, he began. A young girl's determination reminded us that dignity and kindness must never be out of reach. Today, we honor that courage. He turned toward Amara and presented her with a framed certificate of recognition. Amara Johnson, your bravery has inspired a movement that will provide life-saving care to countless families. Your voice has made a difference. The room rose in a standing ovation, and Amara's eyes filled with tears of wonder. Lillian embraced her gently, whispering, "I am so proud of you." Overwhelmed but composed, Amara stepped forward. "I did not know one small act could change so much," she said softly. "I just wanted to save my mom. But if my story can help others, then I will keep using my voice." Her words resonated deeply, drawing admiration from every corner of the room. As the applause faded, Alexander looked at her with quiet admiration. "You have already changed the world," he said. "And your journey is only beginning." Outside, sunlight bathed the city in brilliance, illuminating streets filled with possibility. In that radiant moment, Amara realized that her courage had become more than a single act of love. It had become a legacy. And as she gazed toward the horizon through the towering windows, she sensed that an even greater truth was about to unfold, one that would reveal just how deeply their destinies were intertwined. The afternoon sun poured through the towering windows of the Whitmore Health Foundation, bathing the grand hall in a warm golden glow as applause slowly faded into a reverent silence. Amara Johnson stood beside her mother, clutching the framed certificate in her small hands, her heart still fluttering from the overwhelming recognition. The words of gratitude she had just spoken echoed gently in her mind, but as she looked up at Alexander Whitmore, she sensed that something more remained unsaid. His expression, usually composed and confident, carried a quiet weight, as though he stood at the threshold of a long-buried truth. "Amara," he said gently, his voice soft enough to be heard only by her and Lillian. "There is something I have wanted to share with you." Lillian's eyes met his with curiosity, and Amara tilted her head slightly, her gaze filled with innocent wonder. Alexander hesitated for a moment, drawing a steady breath as memories surfaced, memories of a past he had carefully tucked away beneath years of ambition and success. "Many years ago," he began, "when I was still building my future, there was a woman who believed in me when I had nothing. She worked tirelessly, supporting her family while encouraging me to chase my dreams. Her kindness gave me strength when I needed it most." Lillian's expression shifted subtly as recognition flickered across her face. "Alexander," she whispered, her voice trembling with astonishment. "Could it be?" He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with emotion. "Yes, Lillian. It was you." The room seemed to hold its breath as the realization settled between them. Amara's eyes widened, her small hand tightening around the frame she held. "You knew my mom before?" she asked softly. Lillian's gaze glistened with tears as she nodded. "We were young," she said gently. "He was determined, kind, and full of dreams. I helped him when he needed it most, but our paths eventually parted as life carried us in different directions." Alexander smiled faintly, his voice filled with gratitude. "I searched for you for years, but I never knew where life had taken you. Last night, when I saw Amara's courage, I felt a familiarity I could not explain. It was not until I heard your name that I realized fate had reunited us." Amara looked from her mother to Alexander, awe shining in her eyes. "So you helped us?" "Because you remembered her?" she asked. Alexander knelt beside her, his voice warm and sincere. "I helped you because it was the right thing to do. But discovering who you both are has made this moment even more meaningful." Lillian wiped a tear from her cheek, her voice filled with quiet gratitude. "Life has a way of bringing people back together when they need it most." Alexander nodded. And now, I have the opportunity to repay the kindness you once showed me. The surrounding guests, though unaware of the full conversation, sensed the emotion that filled the room. Sunlight streamed across the marble floor, illuminating the trio in a soft halo of warmth. Amara stepped forward and gently slipped her hand into Alexander's. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for helping us, but for believing in us." He smiled, his eyes reflecting both pride and humility. "The truth is, Amara, you reminded me of the promise I made long ago, to use my success to help others. You did not just change your own future. You changed mine as well." As the golden afternoon light shimmered across the city skyline beyond the glass walls, Lillian stood beside her daughter, her heart filled with gratitude and wonder. Fate had woven their lives together once more, proving that acts of kindness, no matter how small, could echo across time. In that luminous moment, as hope and truth intertwined, they realized that their story was not merely one of rescue or redemption, but of destiny fulfilled and a bond rekindled through compassion, courage, and the enduring power of love. The golden afternoon light shimmered across the glass walls of the Whitmore Health Foundation as a profound stillness settled over the grand hall, wrapping the moment in warmth and quiet reverence. Amara Johnson stood between her mother and Alexander Whitmore, her small hand resting gently in his, her heart full of wonder as the truth revealed moments earlier continued to echo within her. Beyond the towering windows, the Manhattan skyline stretched toward the horizon, its brilliance reflecting a future brighter than any she had ever imagined. Lillian Johnson gazed at Alexander with tearful eyes, her voice trembling with emotion. "Life has brought us back together in the most unexpected way," she said softly. Alexander nodded, his expression filled with humility and gratitude. "Kindness has a way of finding its way home," he replied. "Years ago, you gave me hope when I had nothing. Today, your daughter reminded me of that promise, and because of her courage, thousands of families will receive the care they deserve." Amara looked up at him, her eyes shining like stars. "Does that mean we helped people?" she asked gently. Alexander smiled warmly. "Yes, Amara. You helped more people than you can imagine. Your bravery has become a beacon of hope." A gentle applause rose once more from the gathered guests, echoing through the hall as members of the foundation, medical professionals, and community leaders stood in admiration. Cameras captured the moment, but the true significance lay not in headlines or recognition, but in the quiet understanding shared among them. Alexander stepped forward, his voice resonating with calm conviction. "Today marks not only the success of the Amara Care Initiative but also the beginning of a legacy rooted in compassion and dignity. This program will ensure that no child, no parent, and no family is ever denied life-saving care because of financial hardship." The word stirred the hearts of everyone present. Amara clutched her certificate tightly, feeling its weight as both an honor and a responsibility. She glanced at her mother, whose proud smile radiated love and strength. "Mom," she whispered, "one day I want to become a doctor so I can help people the way they helped you." Lillian's eyes glistened with joy as she embraced her daughter. "And you will," she replied. "Because you already carry the heart of one." Alexander watched them with quiet pride, his voice soft yet resolute. "When that day comes, Amara, the Whitmore Foundation will stand beside you. The world needs compassionate leaders like you." As the ceremony concluded, sunlight streamed across the marble floor, illuminating the trio in a glow that felt almost celestial. Outside, the city pulsed with life, its endless rhythm a reminder that hope could rise even from the most uncertain beginnings. Together, they stepped toward the entrance, where the cool breeze carried the promise of new possibilities. Amara paused at the doorway and looked back at the hall, a reflection shimmering in the polished floor. She remembered the night she had stood in a pharmacy, frightened but determined, clutching a prescription for her mother. That single act of love had changed everything. She turned to Alexander and smiled. "Thank you for believing in us," she said softly. He inclined his head, his voice filled with sincerity. "You taught me that true wealth is measured not in what we possess, but in what we give." As they stepped into the radiant afternoon, the skyline glowed like a tapestry of dreams unfolding. The journey that began with courage had blossomed into a legacy of compassion, uniting their lives in a bond forged by kindness and destiny. and as the sun dipped gently toward the horizon, casting a final golden glow across the city, they understood that their story was not merely one of rescue or redemption, but a testament to the enduring power of hope, proving that even the smallest act of love can illuminate the world for generations to come.